Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction with me, Beth Rigby.
Me, Ruth Davidson.
And me, Harriet Harman.
Now, to all you lovers out there and lovers of electoral dysfunction, happy Valentine's Day. It is the day of love. So if you love us, please follow our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And then we pop up when it's a new episode and you see our little faces on your phone or your feed. What's not to like about that?
That was such a nice link, Beth. It's well seen that you're a professional broadcaster here. All you lovers out there. And if you love us, loved it.
Did
Brilliant.
you like that? I made that
I
up.
did.
I ad-libbed that.
It was very good.
Thank
I mean,
you.
I was impressed.
Thank
but
you.
But also, if you want to listen to the pod, or before you listen to this pod, have you considered watching us? Which is a bit weird for us as well, but we're on YouTube every week now, so you can see our faces and you can see the faces that we pull at each other when we say something that we maybe disagree with. You can just search for Electoral Dysfunction on YouTube and up we come.
Up we pop. It's involved putting a lot more makeup on for podcast recordings though, hasn't it?
Yeah, there's no like wearing pyjamas on my bottom half in case I stand up at any point or anything like that, yeah.
Anyway, come and watch us on YouTube. You can actually watch us at home on your television on your YouTube app. Can you imagine it? Just giant us. It makes me happy because I look at the numbers ticking up and it gives me a little bit of a sizzle fizzle on Valentine's Day.
I mean, Beth, if that's what makes you sizzle on Valentine's Day.
Tell you what, YouTube clicks. That's a whole nother thing. I'm just going to say this now because we've got to actually get on to business, but I don't like Valentine's Day very much. I'm going to say that now, sorry. Do you like it, Harriet?
Well, I'm afraid I remember one Valentine's Day when I was in a House of Commons committee and Edwina Currie was on the other side as the government minister and I was the opposition spokesperson on health. And I noticed all the MPs sniggering and passing something round. And I thought, what is it? They're all sniggering and looking at me. And then when it finally got to me, this little envelope, and I opened it, it was a card and it was a Valentine's card and it said, to Edwina Currie, the really sexy one on this committee, unlike that frump Harriet Harman. And this was supposed to be parliamentary proceedings.
Do you know who it came from?
One of her Tory admirers, I think. But you see, I think that that we should be a bit more elevated than that.
I just want to say, Harriet, you're hot anyway.
Yeah, you're a hottie, Harriet.
What are they talking about?
Exactly.
Don't know anything, do
so
they?
that's rather put me off Valentine's Day forever.
So that's put you off. Ruth, do you like Valentine's Day?
I'm a bit of a curmudgeon about Valentine's Day, and I think that it's a desperate Hallmark holiday that's makey up, and that you should show people that you love them all the time and not just on a single day a year, and it gets you out of stuff. But I have a bit of a history of spending Valentine's Day anywhere kind of except for with my partner, as it turns out, because I've spent it in Bosnia with some moderators of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. I've spent it in Afghanistan with some D-miners. We might go out for dinner over the weekend at some point, but yeah, we're not massive romantics.
Well, look, all you electoral dysfunctional lovers out there, you can just cozy up with us on your YouTube channel tonight, crack open a bottle of red and just watch us chatting about politics. What's not to like?
I mean, if you're watching us on your telly, it also means that your music player is free, so you can put some Barry White on underneath us, just as we're going on there. Do the whole lot. Go wild.
God. We will make politics sexy, damn it, we will. But look, right, let's get on to business though, because we wanted to talk this week about assisted dying again, because we've covered it a lot on the podcast. Both you, Harriet, and you, Ruth, are keen supporters of this bill, and it's back in the headlines. Who wants to explain what's been going on?
This is all about the process now, and it's very different from the normal process for a government bill. All MPs had a chance to make their speeches, and every single MP had a chance to vote as to whether they wanted the bill to go forward. And it goes upstairs to committee. And then there's two things that happen in the committee, which is a group of MPs divided along the lines of those who are in favour of the bill or those who aren't. And their role is to decide whether to amend the bill before it goes back to the whole House of Commons again. And they have had tons of evidence to consider. And then the committee decides, do we want to keep the bill as it is, or do we want to change it? And what Kim Leadbeater is saying is that there's a proposal that they should change the bill so that instead of having the decision about each individual case for somebody who's terminally ill and wants assisted dying being decided by a High Court judge, instead there should be a two-part two-part procedure. One, which is that the bill would establish like a commission chaired by a High Court judge to oversee the whole process of assisted dying being put into practice and make the regulations, but also that there would be on each individual case a panel with a legal chair, but also with wing members on the panel who would decide in individual cases together with the legal chair, who could be social workers or they could have psychiatric experience. So it's making it multidisciplinary rather than just legal, and also setting up an overarching regulatory framework. And she says that's strengthening the bill. So that would be amendments to the bill. The bill would then come back to the House of Commons. And at that point, the House of Commons, again, and it's a conscience vote, there's no whipping. Each individual MP can make speeches. Each individual MP can decide how they vote. But they have a choice at that point. They can either say, no, we want the vote as it originally was. We want it with a High Court judge on every single case. Right. Or they can say, we want the bill as amended with a commission and with a panel deciding on each individual case. Or they can say, we don't want the bill at all. Yeah. We're going to chuck it out.
So just to be clear, Harriet, if people don't like this proposed change, they can vote down that amendment and still vote for the bill as it was originally at the second reading, i.e. having it all going through the courts.
Absolutely right. Or they can bring forward something else, which perhaps the committee hasn't decided to do, and have a further option, which is different altogether.
We're going to come to this, Mick, because I actually spoke to her about the changes last night, because I thought it would be helpful for you all to listen to that and then for us to talk about that. But just on your point there, Harriet, it felt to me when I was talking to her, she was between what you would call a rock and a hard place, because if she doesn't amend it, she hasn't listened to the evidence. If she does amend it, she's open to criticism. And there's a big row now about whether this is Judge Plus, which is how she puts it, because she argues there's a High Court judge overseeing it all, and then these panels with more experts, with more expertise. And then opponents of the bill, or those who really wanted every case to go to a High Court judge and be heard in the court, say that this is Judge minus. So there's a lot of controversy around it now. And I actually spoke to Kim on Wednesday night after I think the bill committee had finished, so it had all been decided what these amendments were going to be, and she talked me through that.
I've tabled an amendment which would suggest changing what I describe as the third layer of scrutiny and safeguarding. But for me, I haven't done that because of capacity of the courts. I've done it because I think it's the right thing to do in terms of enhancing the bill and making it even more robust. And there were people who said, oh, well, what's the judge's role in this? We don't quite understand that, including ex-High Court judges themselves. So I took that on board. And I think by changing the role of having a single High Court judge making this decision to having a multidisciplinary panel of experts, still with legal expertise and also with judicial oversight. I think that's a real strengthening of the bill. Now, if that happens to be helpful for the capacity of the courts, I guess that's a bonus, but that certainly isn't my motivation for doing it.
So just to sum up for people listening, originally when the first reading was going through the House, the way you envisaged it would be that a case would have to be reviewed by a High Court judge. And now you're going to have an amendment that changes that, right?
Yeah, and I understand people's nervousness about that. But actually, the job of the Bill Committee is to make the bill even better and more robust. And whilst I was always very clear that I felt we needed a third layer of this process, which most countries don't have. And some countries are saying to me, actually, you're making this too complicated. But we need an effective third layer that really does add something of value. Now, I think a judge would have done that. But if we bring in social workers and psychiatrists and professionals to that third layer, I think that really is a powerful strengthening. But, I think it's really important as well for people to understand there would still be a judicial oversight of this, because the proposal is of a voluntary assisted dying commission, which would be led by either a judge, a sitting judge or a retired judge, and there would still be legal expertise on the panel, because every panel would be chaired by either an ex High Court judge or a KC of years of experience.
And Kim, this was Danny Kruger, who you've obviously worked with. You're both on opposite sides of this debate. He said about this, the approval by High Court, the key safeguard used to sell the assisted suicide bill to MPs has been dropped. Instead, we have a panel, not including a judge, of people committed to the process, sitting in private without hearing arguments from the other side. It's a disgrace. That's what Danny said. What's your response to that? And have you two, is it getting a bit unpleasant now?
No, we've not fallen out. Don't worry. Danny and I are still on speaking terms. I don't think it's particularly helpful to call something a disgrace. I don't think that's a particularly useful expression. But he also said on the radio the other day that he actually welcomes a more multidisciplinary approach. And I think he said it in the committee proceedings over the last couple of days, that the more eyes on this, the better. So I do think there is some consensus there.
There are some MPs that think they're concerned about it because they worry it's watering down the protections. And there are 60 MPs who said that they had backed the bill at the first reading because it had highlighted the oversight of the High Court judge in overseeing this, and that's why they supported the bill. Now, only 28 MPs have to change their mind, and the bill does not pass the next reading. Are you worried about this now, that some people do think it's watering it down and that they might change their minds? I mean, how concerned are you?
I'm not worried, because what needs to happen is the process needs to be allowed to play out. We're not voting again tomorrow on the bill. That will be weeks, months down the line. And I think what we will give MPs the opportunity to do when it comes back to the House is have a look at this legislation. There will be some changes. I was criticised for not taking any changes, and now I'm being criticised for putting changes in. And there is a point where I get to a position of thinking, well, I just can't win. So there is a point where you get to, if I'm being honest, Beth, where there are some people who are just fundamentally opposed to a change in the law. And I am respectful of that. But actually, there's also colleagues, and you've alluded to it, who genuinely want to get this right. I mean, I knew it was going to be a really tough job. I knew there were going to be people who were going to, come at me and attack the process and attack all those things. It's probably worse than I thought it would be. But I know I'm coming from a good place with this.
Are you getting quite a lot of personal abuse at the moment? Is that what are you?
Yeah. I mean, look, there is some of that. It's not pleasant. It's not nice. Sadly, that is not uncommon in politics these days. Some people are painting me as some evil, horrible woman who wants to kill people, which clearly is not the case. I'm actually quite a nice person. But, that's fine, I guess. But I just try and remain focused, Beth, on doing a really good job on a matter. Let's be clear, that matters to lots of people. And I tell you what happens, literally every day, someone will stop me in the street, at the station, wherever, and just say thank you. And you can tell from the look in their eyes that they have lost a loved one, had a horrible experience. They understand this issue.
And finally, Kim, it feels like it has got a bit knotty this week. If this private member bill fails, do you think that this matter on assisted dying is off the table for a generation? Can you see a world in which the government might take up the bill if it does fall, or do you think it's now or another generation before this matter is settled?
I don't think any government would take up this issue, because it has to be a conscience vote. It has to be a free vote. But if we don't manage to change the law, I will have the voices of all those people who have lost loved ones, whether they've taken their own lives or whether they've gone to Dignitas or whether they've had really horrible, painful deaths, or indeed the terminally ill people that I've spoken to who just want this choice. And that will sit very uncomfortably for me, that we haven't managed to solve the problem that I think very clearly does exist.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really clear to see how much actually this process has taken out of Kim and how much it's affected her. And I think that for people listening at home, they maybe don't understand when it's a big emotive issue like this, how many people get in touch with their MP, or even in the House of Lords. For Harriet and I, we'll have had correspondence about this, and other people that stop you in the street and they want to talk to you about it. And it is one of the emotive issues, and it's also one of the issues where, even though I'm a supporter, I recognise that the people on the other side of this are also doing it from a place of really good intentions, and they're wanting the law to be as good as it can be, and they want end of life care to be as good as it can be, and all the rest of it. But some of the stories that you hear from people, I mean, they absolutely break your heart. And this idea that Kim will be haunted if this doesn't work, if she thinks that for some reason some of the decisions that she's had to make as the bill sponsor, as the person that was the committee chair, mean that this bill doesn't work, that they will haunt her for the rest of her political career and probably the rest of her life. I can fully understand why she's feeling that weight of responsibility right now.
And what's so different about this is no political tribes on this. You can have a family, a group of friends, people in the same political party taking very different views on it. And that's why the way Kim has led it has been so important. There is no automatic loyalty you can pull on here. You've got to walk your way through such a very, very difficult and emotive issue.
She is quite clear that she thinks it enhances scrutiny. She thinks having a panel with social workers and other experts and then having the judicial oversight ultimately actually gives more protections into the process. But for those detractors, for those people worried about assisted dying and about the unintended consequences of that, potentially about people feeling coerced or people feeling like they ought to move to end their own life. The fact that there was a kind of judge element to it in the High Court was really important. There's about 60 MPs who kind of said, we will back this bill because of the fact that these are seen in the High Court, that Kim had stood up at the first reading and said, it's going through the High Court. And so to change that at this point, for those who are skeptics or concerned, it's really kind of spooked them.
But they can change it back.
Yes.
So they've got agency here. If they don't like the change the bill committee has made, they can change it back to what the bill was originally like.
I think there's a point here about process, and it's hard when you're talking about something so emotive to kind of strip it back into the nuts and bolts of how laws work. But part of the process here is, although you heard in the clip from Kim that it wasn't just about the judges' hours and that actually it was about making it better overall, there was an issue of judges' hours in that part of the evidence that was put forward by the judiciary was we expect, especially at the beginning, there will be such a number of people that choose to access this that it would take more hours than High Court judges have, given the number of High Court judges that we have in this country. And therefore, these cases will go into a docket and can last, and it will make all the other like murder trials and rape trials and all the rest of it that goes to the High Court take longer too. So there was a real red flag that was raised by the judiciary. And I think part of the issue is you then become into a conflict of other safeguards that are supposed to be in the bill.
Yeah.
And part of it is making sure that it's only about the end of life, so that it's when people are very close to the end. It's not just that they would have a condition that they would live with for 20 or 30 years that they don't like. But if it's, say, for example, you want to have this coming in within the last 6 months of a person's life to alleviate pain, but you know that court cases are stacked up for 2.5 years, suddenly you've got a bill that's in conflict with itself. So in a sense, the bill team that were working on this in committee had to make a decision about this.
This hits the nail on the head about why people have been a bit spooked about it this week, because Kim is really clearly arguing, when I put this to her, about judges' time, and actually this is a practical change because the bill doesn't work in its current form. She was very much like, no, it's not about that. It's about increased scrutiny. But many people are saying, no, it is about that. This is Sir Nicholas Moyston. He's a retired High Court judge, and this was the evidence he gave to the committee. It really explains it clearly. They expect that perhaps 1% of people who are at the end of life might want to have an assisted death. That's about 6,000 deaths a year. And this is his words, if each took 2 hours to process in the High Court, you have to read it and hear the evidence. One of them has to be oral. You have to write a judgment. That is 12,000 hours. Each High Court judge does 1,000 hours in court, outside court, lots more. So he said, in essence, you're talking about nearly 3/4 of the entire family division doing nothing but assisted dying cases. He said, it is impossible, in my opinion, for this to be done by the High Court. So some people that are sceptical about it, such as the Danny Krugers and other people opposed to the bill, then have grabbed this, haven't they, and said, actually, it's because the courts don't have time and we voted for this on first reading because you said there would be High Court judges.
Danny Kruger, for people that don't know him, as well as being a Tory MP, he also happens to be Prue Leith, the cook's son, and they made a documentary together because Prue is a big supporter of assisted dying, and they've explored it. He just truly and passionately believes that for his own sort of moral centre, that this is the wrong way to go, and I think it's just worth pointing out that.
I mean, he said it was a disgrace that the High Court judge oversight was taken out, and people do feel very strongly about that. So it's got in a bit of trouble, hasn't it?
Well, there's a precedent for the structure that's now in the bill, because when in vitro fertilisation was first introduced and was highly controversial on, an ethics, there was an ethics divide on it, and there was a free vote in the House of Commons. What actually happened was a regulatory authority was set up, and that oversaw the system, and then the individual cases were dealt with in individual clinics according to the regulator, which would set the parameters and oversee the implementation. And that's what's now in this bill, that you have a High Court judge setting the rules and overseeing the implementation of the rules, but individual cases will be decided by a panel, but with legal expertise on the panel as well. But actually, if people don't like it and they do think it's a weakening of the safeguards, they can put that back in the bill, and then the courts would simply have to deal with it. And as Ruth says, this is time critical. And if you've got to be within 6 months of the end of your life to qualify for even applying for this, then obviously they would have to expedite it.
But there is a bit of shadow boxing here, Beth, because for somebody like Danny Kruger, who is fundamentally opposed to this, partly because of his Christian faith, partly because of his other values and beliefs, which is absolutely fair position to have, and I'm not denigrating that position at all, he would be highlighting any flaw that he saw in order to try and persuade those people in the House of Commons that might be waverers, because there's a block of people here who will vote for this because they believe it is the right thing to do. And if I was in the House of Commons, I would be one of those. There is a block of people in there that will always vote it down, irrespective of the number of protections that are in there, because they believe it is the wrong thing to do. This bill will be decided by almost like the MPs that are in the middle, some of whom are being lobbied by their constituents because they themselves don't have a particularly firm view either way, or they're conflicted about it, but they're taking advice from the people that they represent. And in a sense, this is almost a victim of its own trying to reassure people.
And only 28 need to change their mind for the bill that went through to then fail.
Exactly. And this week, Rupert Lowe, Lee Anderson, two Reform MPs, they have said that these changes have prompted them to change their minds. And as you said, Harriet, you only need 28 to swap for this bill to fall. I think it didn't go through by a huge majority.
But there might be others who think this does strengthen it and who didn't vote for it at second reading, who now swing in behind it. It's very hard to predict.
I guess the sort of $1 million question really is, do you think it might wreck the bill? What's your feeling on it, Harriet?
Well, I think it's very difficult to predict, and also very difficult to predict how much debate and discussion that there's going to be in media coverage around it. Is there going to be the same high level of focus that there was for when it was first decided in the House of Commons? And then how will that affect things? And also, when's it coming in?
I mean, I had a chat with someone who's quite close to Starmer's number 10 about it this week, and it was all feeling a bit wobbly and febrile around some of these changes. And I said to this figure who is supportive of assisted dying, what do you think? And he just said to me, Kim's had a shocker of a week. It's been really tough. And I said, do you think it will still pass? And they said, not sure. But we know that the Prime Minister is a free vote, but the Keir Starmer voted for it and has throughout his career as Director of Public Prosecutions and then as a politician been supportive of assisted dying. But the point of all of it is if the bill falls, it's kind of off the table, is it, for another generation? So the question I have for you both is, the bill is a private member's bill. it's a matter of conscience, it's a free vote. You have a Prime Minister who probably would like it to pass, but at the same time, his cabinet is massively split on it, with Wes Street and Health Secretary Shabana Mahmood, Justice Secretary on one side, and Keir Starmer and many of his cabinet on the other.
I think it's most unlikely to happen. It could also, for example, put it in its next manifesto and then bring it forward and say, we've got the people's mandate on it, but say, here it is, it's going to be a government bill, but we're going to give you a free vote. It's got to be a free conscience vote. And I think it's very good that in our country, in our system, we do have things where they don't be subject to party political discussion and decision. Like, for example, on abortion. In America, abortion is highly partisan between the Republicans and the Democrats, and it goes into all their election promises. Here, we leave that as an ethical issue for individual consciences. And I think we should treasure that part of our constitution and keep it. And I wouldn't want to see it as a government bill.
We're going to come back to this time and again. And I think we should get Danny on the pod, and we'll get Kim on again. We're going to follow this story closely. It's one of these things where the debate happens in the House of Commons, but it has real resonance on everyone's lives. So we will keep coming back to it.
Well, I think it's good if we do that, because my worry is that the second time round that this comes back to the floor of the House of Commons, people will think in the media, oh, we've done that and we're not going to discuss it again. So I think it is important that it gets full focus so we can be discussing it again.
Okay, well, we will be discussing it again, but we're going to take a break now. And when we come back, we're going to pick up on Harriet's favourite subject of factions in the Labour Party.
We have had an absolute cracker of a row this week that's seen 2 Labour MPs suspended because of what they've been saying to each other and with Labour councillors on a WhatsApp group that's all come to light, where they've called other MPs trots, they've called trade unionists decrepit, they've said that they've had positive visions of constituents being mown down by bin lorries, and people boasting about how when they were out canvassing, telling other constituents that they lived in a shit street, using words that, and I'm foul-mouthed, but words that I wouldn't use on this podcast. It is wild stuff that's been out there today, and rightly so for Keir Starmer just to lift the whip and tell him you can't be a Labour MP with that. One of them was a minister. It's just, it was absolutely wild.
It's really shocking what was being discussed on this WhatsApp group. And as you were saying, Andrew Gwynne, a health minister, where he's lost his job and been suspended. Oliver Ryan, the Burnley MP, he's also been suspended. 11 councillors have been suspended. Harriet, I mean, how bad is it? It's pretty bad.
I think that's very bad indeed. I think that's very different, though, from the groups that people are getting into, whether it's Blue Labour or the Red Wall Labour or the Growth Group, that's very different. But I think Ruth is right. I think it's very serious. One of the things that people think about MPs is that they talk nicely in public, but actually they're contemptuous of their voters in private, and they say one thing publicly, but they believe something completely different. And what this WhatsApp group is shown exactly that. And a lot of people have said, oh, how stupid they were to write this down. But I think it's much more profound than that. I think if you have got racist thoughts and you've got anti-Semitic beliefs, and if you've got contempt for the people you're supposed to be representing, you shouldn't be an MP. It's not that you shouldn't write it down in a WhatsApp group. You shouldn't be an MP in the first place. It's a bit like if a WhatsApp group of vicars was all talking about how they didn't believe in God and they thought their constituents were rubbish. We wouldn't say, why did they write it down? We'd say those people are not fit to be clergy. So I think that Keir Starmer was absolutely right to not miss a beat, but to say, all of these people, they shouldn't be in the Labour Party. And that comes with political risk, because if there are by-elections, those will be very difficult by-elections.
So just to be clear on that, Harriet, because Andrew Gwynne and Oliver Ryan have both been suspended and are under investigation.
Well, I think
Do you think they should not be MPs and there should be by-elections?
Well, cast your mind back to when these people were putting themselves forward to the local Labour Party to be selected as MPs. If they'd have presented as part of their CV, here is all these things that I've put on WhatsApp, do we think any constituency party would have selected them. What Keir Starmer can decide is whether they are Labour MPs.
Yes,
and the Labour Party will
as
decide whether they're Labour members. But I think if you expel somebody from the Labour Party, there's always a risk. They can decide, right, I'm not going to be an MP anymore, so you have to have in your mind there might be a by-election. But that's not a decision for Keir Starmer. But when I look at those things on the WhatsApp group, and I think there are many more still to come out. They're being fed out bit by bit by bit from the media. I think the test is, would the local members have chosen them in the first place if they knew that's what these people were thinking? And I think the answer to that is no.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we should be careful talking about getting excited about by-elections. I mean, we're, 6 months into a parliament. There's 4.5 years of collecting a 90,000 plus salary that they can both have, whether they've got the Labour whip or not. I don't think they're going to voluntarily resign and refight their seat. I also don't think, given that one represents Burnley and the other one represents a part of Greater Manchester, that Keir Starmer particularly wants a by-election, because his challenge won't be the Tories in either of these places, which he'd probably be quite confident of winning. It will be Reform, and he doesn't want to give them any sort of momentum going into the Scottish and Welsh elections and going into the local government elections either. So I think this is going to be one of the ones where they're quietly suspended and nobody talks about it for a long time. But the idea that there's going to be a bunch of by-elections, I think, is for the birds.
Yeah, just to unpack it a bit, because so basically they're suspended. Then the party has an investigation. If they choose to expel the MP is then an independent MP. Then there's a structure about whether or not the MP just goes, I'm thrown in the towel, and they decide not to be an MP, in which case it triggers a by-election.
One of the things that slightly caught me short on this is that, I've known Andrew Gwynne for more than 20 years, and he's been a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party, as have I. And I would not have thought that he had those thoughts in his mind, or would be capable of thinking or writing that. And it's made me look around and wonder about my judgment. How many other people are having, thoughts like that, and yet who are representing people? I think it's caught a lot of us up short, really.
Were you really surprised by it?
I was horrified, yeah. And I was very surprised. I would not have, you've got colleagues who you think are a bit, their values aren't as good as they should be, or are reckless in the way they talk and say things. But I didn't have him down as that one. So it's been really shocking and disappointing. But it just reminds everybody, nobody's forced to be an MP. Don't be an MP unless you actually believe in representation. You want to help your constituents. That's part of our belief system. Do another job.
I mean, some of the stuff is really grotty, really horrible, low moral, just grotty, low rent stuff. And you just, it doesn't make anyone's life better for even seeing that. So either stop it or leave.
Andrew Gwynne said he deeply regretted his badly misjudged comments and apologised for any offence caused. And Oliver Ryan also apologised, saying some of the comments made in that group were completely unacceptable and I fully condemn them. He also said he regretted not speaking out at the time, and he recognised that failing to do so was wrong. We want to pick up on where we left last week with the Red Wall Labour MPs. Now, Harriet, you warned about factionalism, you don't like it. There's a bit of a revival going on around the Red Wall, but also around Blue Labour.
Well, we've got all the colours of the rainbow, haven't we? So the Red Wall group were a group of MPs starting up who've got Reform in second place. And Blue Labour has been going for 10 plus years, and is not Blue Labour as in blue like the Tories, but blue as in blue collar. And Blue Labour is about, we've got to focus on the working class voters who we lose when we get into government. And this happened, in 1997 as well. I've got two concerns. One is that the Blue Labour argument, of course it's right to focus on working class voters, but we've also got to offer a better future, not just turning back the clock to the 1950s. I don't think we want social conservatism. People's aspirations are different now than they were in the 1950s. So we've got to be offering not just a reminder about a better yesterday, but about a better tomorrow. I think the other thing is that MPs will all have different people in second place in their constituencies. So some will have the SNP in second place, others will have the Tories in second place, others will have Reforms, and others will have the Green. I think there's nothing wrong with MPs getting together and thinking about how they appeal to voters in their constituency. But what we don't want to have is factionalism. The point is to have a proper debate, but not to have factionalism. You just have to watch that boundary.
This is my new obsession because Blue Labour, as Harriet was saying, was sort of set up many years ago by a guy called Maurice Glassman, and it was also run by a guy called John Cruddas, who was a former MP. And it was all about blue-collar Labour with patriotism, traditional values. So it was kind of socially conservative, if you like, and all about blue-collar workers. And it's really interesting to me because the emergence of those red wall MPs where seats went to the Conservatives and they've come back to Labour this time round, there is now a kind of revival of blue Labour, their ideas in the Labour Party. And it seems to me that what is beginning to emerge, and I think it'd be very interesting to watch this through the Parliament, is that there is a kind of group of MPs and they're reviving Blue Labour. It ties into this new MP Red Wall group as well. You know, when you talk to these MPs, part of the reason that they liked Boris Johnson was the positivism of the levelling up and trying to spread wealth across the UK. So I would say watch the space on Blue Labour. And I don't think it's just about ideas for the future. I think it's also going to be about lobbying the government.
But I do think it's interesting, I have to say, that we've got to this stage where there's already these kind of factions that are agitating within Labour, and they've only been in 6 months. Now, don't get me wrong, the Tory party has had many, many factions in its time. They can fight like ferrets in a sack. They can be really unhelpful to the leadership. But it generally happens as you get to the fag end of a government, and it hastens that end. It doesn't happen this early out the box. I mean, it's actually astonishing how early we've started to see this. And as much as Harriet hopes that they all behave, and they behave in a parliamentary way that's helpful to the government, you don't set up groups to be pressure groups unless you want to exert pressure. So I think it's something that Keir Starmer has to watch.
Well, I was thinking about this because I think that what's happened is that before 1997, we had loads of groups and debates about how to the left or the right the party should be, and this was under Neil Kinnock, and then those discussions carried on under John Smith, and we had shadow cabinet elections where it was all played out, and then there was further discussions under Tony Blair, and then we had our narrative and we had our manifesto, and when we got in, we had unity for governing. I think Keir Starmer's path into politics and the discussions in the PLP are the Parliamentary Labour Party are at a different stage, because we've gone from Corbynism to then the sort of more mainstream Starmer arguments, and we haven't had a sort of long run-up of discussion of ideas, so that seems to be starting now we're in government. And I think the difficulty, exactly as Ruth says, is how do we have that discussion about the narrative, about what we mean as a government, as well as how we renew, when we're actually trying to give a clear message to the people about what we're doing and not destabilise the government.
Part of your unity under Blair, though, was that you had a massive figure of the left in John Prescott as deputy leader and deputy prime minister that squared off the left, and he was full square behind the leadership and behind the New Labour project. And his role within that was so important. And there's always been this kind of sense that Angela Rayner isn't necessarily Keir's outrider and wingwoman and all the rest of it, more that she is somebody who is on the rise herself and is waiting her time to take over. And that's why, for me, as a sort of observer, people like John McDonnell are so important, having been, the Shadow Chancellor under Corbyn, very lefty. He's not creating any trouble at all at the moment. He's being a really good boy. But if he starts shaking the tree, then I think that you'll start seeing a lot more. So it's about also personalities within political parties also matter, and the positions within political parties. And at the moment, this is all very low level and all very grassroots. But if it starts having a king across the water that could be a potential leader, then honestly, these things can change really quickly. We've seen it before.
I think for me, what will be interesting in the coming months is that these factions are forming. The Red Wall Blue Labour faction is particularly interesting because they are having won back those seats lost to them by Boris Johnson's victory, having won them back and now facing reform, they're kind of looking in a slightly different direction to many parts of the Labour Party in metropolitan areas, right? So they've got a different agenda with different priorities. And then the government are doing things that they probably don't like very much. And there's a question, I think, of what's going on behind the scenes in terms of trying to influence, and whether or not at some point later in the Parliament, if they're not happy, whether they begin to go above the parapet and cause headaches for particularly the Chancellor. I think it could become quite tense. At the moment, what are they? They're all a nest of singing birds. Is that how you describe it when you're all sitting in your nest? A chorus of singing birds for now. Well, look, that's all we have time for this week. But remember, you can get in touch wherever. Voice note us on WhatsApp to the burner phone 07934 200 444, or email us at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk, and we'll be back next week answering a load of your questions.
Remember to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and do tell your friends about us too, or your lovers. It is, Lovers Weekend. It is Valentine's,
Can you imagine on the 14th of February whispering in somebody's ear a loving thing, watch Electoral Dysfunction? Valentine's message.